somebody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just like say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste, they could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. In my case, like I took longer to figure out how to do this than anybody I've ever met. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
Dear Fabrizia, I'm really excited to be starting this new thing with you, this podcast that we are going to call Closing the Gap.
Hi, it's really nice to be here with you too.
It's really nice. We've been doing a little thing about closing the gap. We've been doing a masterclass in the past, which was a series of lessons for a select group of people, but we thought we would do something more, right?
Yes. So we thought of podcasting, which means we don't have to wear makeup to do them, which is great. Especially you.
Especially me, yeah. So it's going to be a podcast, and it's going to be about closing the gap. And the people who have been on our masterclass already know what closing the gap refers to. And if you're listening to this podcast, at the beginning we had this as a way of introduction, the voice of Ira Glass, American writer and radio show host, to say something about this gap.
Yes, it became a really important concept, and we thought it would be worth digging into it because we were doing the master classes for creatives, for people who are stuck in a rut sometimes, because when we're creative we get stuck a lot, and for whoever is looking for their style or their vision or for new ideas and all sorts of things. So that's when the idea for the masterclass came about, and we started digging, and the more we dig, the more we find. So we thought we'd carry on, and I think it's I really thank you for this idea and opportunity. It's great.
You're very welcome, and thanks for being with me today, and for the all the other episodes that will be forthcoming in the next weeks. So it all starts from this idea of the gap that Ira Glass talks about, the gap between where most creatives are when they start out, because they have great taste, they realize that what they're doing is not that great yet. And what Ira Glass says is that we need to do a lot of work. You need to do a lot of work, but I don't think that it's only not about the work, especially not something that can be solved in a very concise sentence. There's much more about that. It's not just doing the work, right?
Yes. So the concept of how to work, how to put in deliberate practice, what we call deliberate practice, deliberate work. And some tips and techniques and good mindsets about how to pursue this. And I don't think it's just for people who are starting up, because we all come to a point where we're closing the gap a little, and then the gap opens up again because our vision gets bigger, and so we're constantly having to close the gap and improve ourselves and improve our skills, and yeah.
And it's about photography. I mean, we are photographers. We're going to talk a lot about photography. We're going to talk about what it means to be a creative, what it means to be an artist in the context of photography. But it's not just for photographers. I think what we will be covering in this series of podcasts is applicable to a wide range of creatives, be they writers, designers, painters, you name it.
Yes, yes. All creatives really have the same issues, and it doesn't really matter if you're a photographer, or a painter, or a designer, or a cake maker, or anyone who has a creative vision for something that they can't quite reach yet. That's what this is for, and mostly it's also to encourage people to pursue it, because we tend to get a lot of things and people that almost seem to row against us, make us think we're not good enough, we can't get there, so we don't. Yeah, this is supposed to be also a very encouraging and practical series of things that we can share, and we can all kind of dig into this together.
Yeah, we do believe that it's in the end it's a matter of mindset most of all. It's not about technique. It's not only about technique, so we're not going to cover technique. We're going to cover things like the getting the right mindset towards closing this gap, which means changing our attitude and the way we see ourselves, and dealing in appropriate ways with the way others perceive ourselves.
Yes, and there's sometimes people are also surrounded by people who don't believe in them, and they think they're just wasting their time, and they are negative about it. And sometimes it's family members. Sometimes it's really difficult to stick to your guns when you're trying to do something creative and you yourself don't see that it's good enough. And then it's really, really easy to just give up. Or you're too much of a perfectionism, or you have other, there's a lot of resistance that, having to show your work and not being good enough and not feeling it's good enough, but then you need some feedback. And we'll be talking about all of these things that happen. And, but, I believe, or we both believe, that we are created by nature. I have not met very many people that I can say have no creative edge. Whether that edge actually spurs us to do something with it or not, it can be stronger or less strong. Some people, have less of a need to produce, something creative and put it into practice. And some people just cannot not do it. So that is what changes. But a lot of people, for years I thought I was not creative. And then I was making these fantastic cakes, decorated, amazing things. And because that's, I was at home with the children, I couldn't do anything else. And I was my creativity was coming out in all kinds of crafty things. But because it wasn't like painting or, making sculpture or something, I thought, oh, I'm not creative. It's ridiculous. So sometimes we're not even aware of our own creativity. So all of these things to me are fascinating topics to just have a nice conversation about and kind of dissect and dig into. And hopefully they'll be interesting for you too, listeners.
So you mentioned that word resistance. Was that on purpose or was just a casual?
Well, there's always resistance when we need to put something out there. There's always a resistance when we have to be seen, I think. Narcissists probably don't have this problem. I don't know. But then some are perfectionists. So then that's the other thing that kicks in. So there is a resistance that comes from our own insecurity and all kinds of personal issues that have nothing to do with the level of skill or with the, how good our work is. We never feel it's good enough anyway, right?
Yeah, no, I was just joking about the fact that one of our favorite books is the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, where he talks at length about this concept of the resistance, and we might go over some of the things that Pressfield says in the book in the coming episodes. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode on that, because I think that is one of the key books. I have a few books that I can say have been like, you can't say cornerstones because you can't have too many corners. I think my house has a lot of corners at this point, but books that really have helped me nail some part of my work and some part of my journey and see it clearly and act upon it, and, that have, really helped change things. And that is one of them. So let's do one on that.
I would like to maybe do a little non-comprehensive list of what we are going to talk about. See if we can, as I said, this is not scripted. We don't even have a precise plan of what is coming up in the next episodes, but we just made some notes. We have some show notes that we have prepared, and that will evolve organically, I think. But
yeah, we want to keep this like a conversation. You and I would have discussing things, and not really as something that we have all written out. So we're gonna tell you stuff, I like the conversation. It also takes a little pressure off.
And another thing is that we would like this to be not just a conversation between me and you, but we invite everyone to submit us their questions, their comments, feedback, criticism, whatever. We invite everyone. We are going to put on the website that it goes together with this podcast, which, by the way, is at closingthegap.live. So you can just go there and check out all the episodes that we will have published. And there will be a little button on the main page and also under every episode where you can just click and record your question. If you have comments, if you have questions, just introduce yourself and ask us a question. And we will try to answer as many of those questions as we possibly can in every episode that we do.
Ideas, new episodes too.
Also, of course. So we thought that was a great way, because sometimes I did other podcasts in the past, and you ask people, please leave your comments, type your comments in a comment box, or send us an email and so on. That's a little bit of a kind of an obstacle there. I mean, a little bit of friction if people need to type, put their hands on the keyboard and type. It's much easier to just click a button and say something, and it's very easy, very automatically recorded, and of course we will only use it with your permission. So there's a little button, send us your questions there, and just click on it and record your question, and we'll broadcast it and try to answer it if we can during one of the next episodes. So that's the thing I wanted to say before I forgot, because I think it's really important that we have this. It's not just you and me, Fabrizia. It's everyone in our audience we want to have a conversation with.
Oh yeah, actually, basically, we're all making this podcast together, which would be the best way to do it.
Yeah, and also comments and questions, of course. And another thing is, what are your struggles? What are you struggling with? Just tell us. What are your problems? Why you're not feeling like you're closing this gap? What's obstacles and roadblocks stand in your way? And we can talk about them. See if we have maybe some suggestions based on our experience, or we can gather the collective wisdom of our audience. Maybe others will have their own opinion about this. We don't claim to have the knowledge sufficient to solve everyone's problems. But with the collective wisdom of the hive mind, maybe we can help everyone.
Yeah, this could turn into a really interesting group experiment or group development and a community, really, because I find that in all the groups that I run for courses and things, when there is a community, there's people commenting, not commenting, just communicating with each other, then that's where you get, the forge of all ideas and innovation and sparks of new things, and that is really exciting. So I hope that this will become something like that we can manage to create a little community here that follows this idea of closing the gap. We all want to get better at what we do. And then the thing is, like, you close the gap and then the gap gets bigger because then you move the bar and you want to do something. So there's always this thing. Nobody actually is arrived, and then says, okay, I close the gap, I'm okay, now I'll do my thing and I'm perfect. Then you just move on to the next and create another gap. So I'm sure that any artist doing anything at all is facing a gap, big or small. And sometimes we know how to close it and sometimes we don't. So this is what we want to, what we want to dig into.
So let's see if we can maybe give a little list of the things we want to talk about. The obstacles, the roadblocks, as I was saying, that either people find in their way or they consciously or unconsciously put in their own way. And these are all manifestations of what Steven Pressfield again would call the resistance. But things like lack of self-esteem, perceptions that we have no talent, that we're not destined to do something great, either because this is something that we believe ourselves or because we listen too much to the naysayers, the people that tell us, well, why don't you get a real job instead of taking photos or putting colors on a canvas or plucking the strings of a guitar and something like that. That's something that I really, we discussed this also in the past about the idea of talent, the myth of talent, and what it really means. Perfectionism is another thing. Sometimes we think that we cannot really put ourselves out there if what we create is not perfect. We keep working, refining, and so on and so forth until it's we believe it's perfect because we are afraid that we will be judged, maybe. Practice, not being able to practice in the right way. I think this is an important thing because Ira Glass says you need to do a lot of work, and that's okay, and I believe it, but it needs to be the right kind of work. That kind of work, that practice needs to be structured in an appropriate way, so it's actually effective, and so on.
You talked about perfectionism, and that's really important, and of course, perfectionism is not just that it will never be perfect. So it is an excuse for not putting ourselves out there. It comes from insecurity, and resistance also comes from that in a way. So and then the other things that are outside of us, we start blaming things outside of us, like, oh, I got another job, I got a family, I don't have time, I don't have a studio, I don't have a place to practice, I don't have the right environment, and so I can't do this. And those are all sorts of self-sabotaging things that just say, oh, when this and that is all sorted out, then I will, do this, finish my book or write my book or whatever, edit that personal project, or, start learning or start play my guitar again or whatever. So there's a lot of excuses that we pluck out of thin air, really. And if there's something outside of us, then we feel justified in saying, of course, that is an actual problem. If we don't, if we have 5 children and not much time, all of these things, they're not unreal problems, but we need to see, how much of this is something that I am taking as an excuse not to start, even in a small way, and how much of it is an actual handicap that to my work. So, and often it turns out that, these are the first things that people use not to get on with it, because there is a fear of success as well in what we do. What happens if this is successful? Unconsciously, then we need to come up with something else just as good, and we know we may not be able to do it, so then we put the brakes on everything. There are so many different aspects of what constitutes a spanner in the wheels, basically. But some of these spanners we're really putting ourselves.
There is a term that is used in software development circles, from which the kind of circles that I come from, and it is shaving the yak. So the yak is one of those oxen, right? Cows from the Himalayas, which are very hairy. And so that the saying goes that in order to do anything, people will say, okay, I need to prepare my photography exhibition, for instance. And before that, I need to get the prints. But before getting the prints, I need to contact the printer. And before that, I need to have good prints. And I need to edit my work. And I need to convert it to process my photos. And before I do that, I need to go and shoot my photos. But before I go out, I need to buy new shoes because it's cold outside or something like that. And in the end, you need to do this and this and this. And before this, you need to shave the yak, which is a completely unrelated thing, but goes on to show that people will put on any kind of excuse that you need. Before doing this, I need to do this. And it's not just that I need to do this. This needs to be done perfectly. So before I show my work to the world, I need to create a website. And before that, I need to have a domain. And then I spend days thinking about my domain name. And then I need to see, I need to choose which platform. Is it going to be Squarespace, WordPress, Wix, PhotoShelter, whatever? And then you
need the logo.
You need the logo. And you need to choose a theme and the colors and the fonts. And it never ends. So that's really, as you said, throwing spanners in our way. And that's we will have I think an episode about that, about just starting, just doing it, or even starting before you're ready.
Yeah, start before you're ready is a great mantra that I say to myself regularly. And even this podcast, we really are starting before we're ready. We did not wait to have all of the episodes sorted out and all of the topics and all of the notes and all of that stuff. We don't, like you said, we're not following a script, but we feel that there's enough to say for something to come through, hopefully. That will be useful to somebody listening. And I find this is, can be a lot more creative in a way, because when we don't have everything ready, we don't have everything written down and all our ducks in a row, then our ducks can actually go off on a tangent that might lead us into interesting new ground and new territory that we would not find if we had everything planned out. So, and we will do a podcast on planning, because that's a big thing with me, but I'm a firm believer in flexible planning, and I've, actually worked to develop a way to be very flexible, even if it's very planned, because it needs to be if you're working on something. But it needs to have room to just, fly off for a minute and see something new and then come back and find some inspiration where you're not expecting it. So there you go. I do tend to go off on a tangent, so stop me when I do.
No, it's fine. I love it. We're also going to talk about, maybe not the beginning, but later on, about, we know that some of the people we have worked with in our masterclass, they will also like to get some kind of recognition or success, whether it be purely commercial success, that's straight question, I want to sell my photos and I don't know how to, or even just some kind of peer recognition. I would like to put my photos out and get compliments. People tell me that my photos are beautiful. right? Without even thinking of the getting likes on Facebook or Instagram. And we know how fickle and meaningless that is, but people still crave for recognition of their peers, if not outright commercial success. And so how to things like branding, things like marketing, maybe.
Well, it would be interesting to see, while you think about that, to know from you if you are a professional, if you are not a professional creative, because there is a difference when you put the weight of your life onto your passion. Sometimes that can really crush it and can cause a lot of problems. On the other hand, when you have a passion and you have another job, and you're doing it out of your free time, then your time doing it is, you feel it's limited, and sometimes it's frustrating. And there's the in-betweeners who would like to leave their jobs and take on their creative work full time. And I see a lot of photographers at that stage as well. And so when you put your questions, or if they're, it would be nice to know where are you at. Because it's important, when we do something because it's out of our passion and it's not tied to a commercial outcome, or when actually what we do really needs to, bring home the bacon. But at the same time, we don't want to compromise. We don't want to kill it just because it needs to be the way that we actually, pay our bills. So there's different aspects to our work that's also tied to our own situation, and that would be nice to know if somebody wants to share it. Say it in your recordings.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. That's the thing that slipped my mind. Life-work balance, or maybe life-work passion balance, because people have other kind of jobs, but they want to pursue photography as a passion, or even more than a passion, maybe a side gig, and they have also a family life to balance, and it's not easy. So we will definitely be talking about those topics.
Yeah, also because I don't believe in balance, so make an interesting podcast.
You don't believe in balance, you believe in imbalance, which
Imbalance.
can be, balance creates tension, imbalance creates tension, and that means progress. That's something to definitely explore.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we just gave a nice intro of what we are going to talk about in the next episodes. And as I said, we didn't even have a plan for this episode, but I think we covered pretty much everything that we wanted to cover for this little pilot episode, introduction episode. So we can just leave it at that and invite everyone to subscribe to our podcast. Again, you can go to closingthegap.live. You will also find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and others. If you go to the site, there's a sidebar with all the little ways that you can subscribe. You can subscribe via email if you'd like to get little email in your inbox every time we publish a new episode. My idea is to do an episode every week. We'll see if we can keep up with that. It's kind of ambitious but I think it's important that we set ourselves a schedule. So expect an episode from us every week.
Yeah, we'll try that. Definitely. I will plan it and be flexible.
All right. So that's really all for this episode. And
this was a pleasure. This was so nice. And I hope everybody listening has as much. I hope it's relaxing and something you can listen to while you're doing things, traveling, or and it's not too long. We're not going to keep them long, and we try not to ramble, promise. For now, I will see you, hear you, and talk to you next week.
Talk next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.